This is a Ring Magazine rankings from the 80s. Now, Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, and he never got to fight Tim Witherspoon. Witherspoon was knocked out in the first round of the Unification tournament. But after that, everyone else on the list is beaten. Spinks, as you can see, is the champion. That would be the Ring Magazine champion. Tyson had 3 straps. He was the undisputed champion. He knocked out Spinks in a round to become undisputed Ring Magazine lineal. He outpointed Bone Crusher Smith for that WBA belt. He knocked out Pinklon Thomas in a defense in between beating Bone Crusher and Tony Tucker, who he beat at number 8. He knocked out Trevor Burbeck in 2 to win his first title at 20 years of age. Frank Bruno, he defeated him twice, defending against him in 1989 and taking his WBC title in, 1995? And he knocked out Tyrrell Biggs in the 80s, defending his 3 straps. I believe this was a ranking for 1986, and he faced 9 opponents, including the champion, and beat 8 of them. Most of these guys were world champions at some stage or the other as well, probably apart from Tyrrell Biggs. Cleared it out. Muhammad Ali, he went one better, yeah? George Foreman, he was the Ring Magazine champion. He was beaten shortly after they made this list, I guess. Joe Frazier, Ali beat him 2-1 in their 3 fights. He beats Ken Norton 2-1 in their 3 fights. He beats Jerry Quarry twice. Ron Lyle is stopped. Ernie Shavers is outpointed. Oscar Bonavina, he's stopped. Joe Bugner is beaten twice. Jimmy Ellis is beaten Chuck Wepner. So he's not only cleaned up everybody on the ranking, he's beat at least 3 or 4 of them 2 times. You know, the great boxing resumes normally have 1 or 2 losses on them. Probably more. And I'm not saying they have to have losses on them. But if you're undefeated and you've only made 4 or had 4 title wins, what happens if you take a loss? The resume doesn't look so great. People can be riding the quest of the wave about how good you're looking right now, but you take a L. Can you really compare these resumes to the greats? You see, a great resume needs a lot of bodies, a lot of accomplishments to absorb the L's. You see, like Roy Jones, the back end of his career, all them knockout losses. Well, the front end of his career, from middleweight, super middle, light heavy to heavy, and the eye tests, the way he operated in the ring, keeps him as a fan favorite, as one of the best fighters they saw. It's all well and good using fantasy matchups and the eye tests to say how great a fighter is, but there has to be a balance there. You can look good in the ring, knockouts, but you need a body of work there too. You need a resume. You know, Tyson Fury, he went after Deontay Wilder, beats Wilder 2 out of 3, 2 wins, 1 draw, and what he does, he sings Deontay Wilder's praises like that's the only fighter out there who can fight. And what he's trying to do is pass off the rest of the heavyweights like they're nothing. But he hasn't fought them. Wilder hasn't fought a lot of them. AJ's fought more relevant heavyweights than both of them. Deontay and Tyson. Wilder has 10 title wins, AJ has 9. But AJ's been a pro for at least 5 years less than Wilder and has considerably less fights. So he's accomplished more in a shorter time and in less fights. And he's been a unified champion. What has Wilder been doing all that time for him to be so great? Fury as well. He turned pro in 2008. AJ turned pro 2013. Has 8 less fights than Fury. And has made way more defenses. Unified defenses, unifications, mandatories, the lot. These two have almost been hiding from the rest of the division by fighting each other. There wasn't really no need for the third fight after the second one, was there? 2 wins against Deontay Wilder. 3 fights. And, you know, he wasn't supposed to get a draw in the first fight, coming off the couch all that weight. He had to lose. And then 2 stoppages against the Grain when Wilder was supposed to be the puncher. It's a great story. From where he came from, what he did across the pond. That's all a great story. No doubt about that. And it will wear well, and it should wear well. It should make him a popular British heavyweight. It definitely should. Now, I don't think he's retiring. I think the Arum contract is up. There's a lot of factors going on, like where does Daniel Kinahan fit into his plans right now after they've been putting seizures on his cash flow in Bahrain and BTL looking into the dealings with him. America have frozen his assets, and a lot of people have disassociated themselves away from him. And I think he's just waiting to see what the next move is. But let's say he was serious about retiring. Well, he's retiring because he knows a loss on that flimsy amount of title wins will result in him having to fight on to compete with anything like Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali's stats or Lennox Lewis. You know, like, people have got a lot to say about AJ, and they're very disrespectful because British heavyweight boxing has a vast history, and Anthony Joshua has the second most title wins out of any British heavyweight, behind Lennox Lewis, who had 15. AJ has 9. Tyson Fury doesn't need to fight that guy. You're both fighting in the same era, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. AJ needs to beat Usyk in their free belt fight coming up soon. Even if AJ loses to Usyk, depending how he loses, that fight is still relevant. He still has 9 title wins. He's still one of the biggest draws in boxing. You know, you should be looking to beat all your domestic rivals. AJ, Joe Joyce, etc. Lennox Lewis, he beat Derek Williams. He beat Glenn McCrory. Gary Mason, what was he, 35-0, 32 knockouts or whatever it was. He beat him. Frank Bruno, Akinwande, he beat all his domestic opposition. And that's where Fury needs to be if he wants to be taken seriously as an all-time great. The facts are, though, he avoided David Price for the British title back in the day. He avoided Pulev for the European, walked out on the Ustinov fight. And let's say Usyk loses, depending on how he loses, if he gives a good account of himself, he should be looking to fight Usyk. He's a former undisputed champion, a former gold medalist. This is a relevant contender. I'm not no big gambler, but, you know, me and my friends, we play cards. Not as much as we used to, but, you know, we play cards, and it is what it is, yeah? Pontoon. That's our game. Now, there's normally 3 of us, including me. On occasion, there's been people who come around and they'll be up 20 or 30 pounds. And they say, "No, I'm out. That's it, man. I'm not playing no more." Because they're really satisfied with what they've won. And we say, okay, cool. Like, you know, like I say, we're not no big gamblers, but until you stacked up 200 upwards, and let's say everybody's cleaned out of whatever they got in their pocket, and they don't want to go to the ATM and it's getting late, we don't stop till then, until there's a conclusive winner. Now, that's a long way of me saying Fury is walking away from the table a little early. When it's just the 3 of us, there's no way I'm going to have 150 pounds of his money and another 150 of my brethren's money and say, yeah, I'm done. No, I got to give them the opportunity to get it back. I know that. That's an unwritten contract between us, maybe just as brethrens, but I just wouldn't do that to them, and they wouldn't do that to me. I mean, and besides, they want to take everything anyway. I mean, they want to clean up. If you're going to walk away with so much on the table, you know, I understand you're going to say you're better than AJ, perhaps, because he's a contemporary. I understand that. You're competing with AJ to see who does the biggest gates, and I get that. But Lennox Lewis, Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Joe Louis, and many more should be left alone. They shouldn't even, you know, like, that should kind of be outlawed. The journalists should say, "No, we can't let you do that, man. Don't do that. Don't do that." But they have no integrity, you know what I mean? As far as I'm concerned, they have no integrity at all. You know what's really interesting? Looking at all the greats and who's got the most defenses. George Foreman hasn't even made the list. He hasn't even made the list. I think he's 1 fight ahead of Tyson, 5 title wins, because I don't think they're including the fights with Crawford Grimsley, because that was for the IBA and WBU. They might not be including that. The reason I went to Foreman is to say there's got to be balance in all of this, yeah? Because to me, a lot of Tommy Burns' defenses weren't against the greatest opponents. A lot of them were Brits and Australians like Bill Squires and whoever was there. And there were some decent fighters there, I guess. But when they met his asking price to fight Jack Johnson in Australia, he got cleaned up. But he was a lineal champion. He made 13 defenses. But does anybody think Tommy Burns had a better career than George Foreman? Probably not. You know, like, Foreman's accomplishments were obviously winning the heavyweight title 20 years apart from when he won it in 1974 to winning it back in 94. Oldest man to win a heavyweight title. So your accomplishments in terms of who's a great heavyweight can come in a variety of different ways, you know. Foreman has the eye tests on his side. Like spectacular knockouts, one of the biggest punching heavyweight champions ever. We saw what he done with Frazier, Norton, Cooney, Mora, and many more. And some of the great battles he put up as well. It's not all about the winning battles. Look at that battle he put up against Holyfield. Remember when he took that, what was it, 10, 12 punch combination? And he rocked, he wobbled a little. But the old boy stood in there and ended the fight on the front foot with Holyfield saying, okay, that's enough now. Let me just box out the rest of the fight on the back foot and not get clipped with anything, because he ain't going nowhere. There's the Ron Lyle battle, which he won. That weren't for no title. That was an NABF title, actually. How much times were each man on the floor? Crazy fights. Now let's talk about Tyson Fury and today's heavyweights. When you talk boxing, you got to look at the big picture. Because, you know, today's hype can easily be yesterday's news. I'm not saying he's a hype job, but 94,000 at Wembley, right uppercut finish, and there's a feel-good factor about Tyson Fury. No doubt about that. But you retire, the game will continue. And who knows? It may be Usyk, it may be AJ who goes on a run. It may be one of the contenders like Joyce, Hergovic, Jared Anderson get a shot, they go on a run. It could be an outsider. Or it could just be the division gets itself into gear and we get a lot of the matches that will determine if this is a true golden era or not. You know, like when you look at the 70s, when you think about films like When We Were Kings, that ain't just about Ali. It's about Foreman, Norton, Frazier, and other heavyweights who the film wasn't centered around. They all made for probably the most competitive era of heavyweight boxing in the 70s. And boxing fans and the heavyweights, they ain't going to sit around pining on Tyson Fury. They're going to get on and try and create their own legacies. You know, whether they do 90,000 crowds like AJ or 94 like Fury, they're going to do big crowds. When the right fights are made, there's going to be big crowds and a lot of pay-per-views sold. People need to be mindful of that. Even if you're a fanboy, you need to be mindful of that. Think beyond your fighter as well, if you're really into the sport. I know some of you don't like the video, but if every boxer was to think like Tyson Fury, I get a decent win, or as soon as I get a sanctioning belt and I'm being mandated, or I've got to take on good voluntaries and I've got to defend consistently, I can't pick a Tom Schwartz or Otto Wallin, who turned out to be better than most people thought he would be. But he was still a cherry pick. When you can't do that no more, when you can't just fight when you want to fight and select who you want to fight, and now you want to retire, if boxing was centered around guys like that, there'd be no intrigue. It's all about the consistency. It's all about coming through, getting that W when you do have an off day, but you're the champion and your consistency is key. It's all about that. It's not all about this hype. Yeah, nice right uppercut, 94,000. Yeah, great. Yeah, that's all great. But it's the struggle, taking chances, risking the L. Who foresaw Josh Taylor struggling against Jack Catterall, and all of a sudden people were slating Josh Taylor from him being, oh yeah, Josh is pound for pound. Oh no, I don't rate Josh no more. One fight, yeah? He came away with a W, you know, but it could have been an L. And then it would be how you come back from the L. That's boxing. That's the realities. And the more you fight against a high level of opposition, the more likely you're going to lose. And you're going to have to show character to come back from the L. The other option is to retire. Then you don't have to worry about losing. And recently you see the rise in the media and fantasy matchups, because fantasy matchups allow you to ignore research, ignore the statistics, and you can say Fury beats this guy historically and he beats all his contemporaries. He's the greatest. He can retire on 4 title wins. I do remember years back there used to be some quality debates on fantasy matchups, matching up fighters from different eras. But now it's just a propaganda tool for fanboys. That's all that is, you know, like they don't take a lot of stuff into account. Okay, well, match Tyson Fury with Joe Louis. Tyson Fury is supposedly 6'9". Joe Louis is 6'1". But depending if we're going to match Tyson Fury in 1938 with Joe Louis or make the matchup in 2022, what would happen? Well, more than likely, in 1938, Tyson Fury might not be 6'9" or 6'8". And in 2022, more than likely, Joe Louis would be bigger than 6'1", because people are generally bigger today than they was back then. They don't take that into account, you know. And you have to take these things into account. Like if Forbes magazine are doing an article on boxing purses from, let's say, when Ali and Frazier made 2.5 apiece, and they're going to compare it to what AJ and Fury are making today. Well, what do? They recalculate the purses from 1970 and adjust them accordingly to the fluctuations of inflation from then till now. Because how are you going to make this fantasy match? Is one person going to be boxing in 1938 and the other one in 2022? No, you're supposed to gauge it with whatever method you're going to use. So there's some kind of common ground that one doesn't have this huge advantage because the facts are all one-sided in his favor. Because he was born 80 years after Joe Louis. If you were to match Jesse Owens and Usain Bolt, once again, if Jesse Owens was racing Usain Bolt today, he'd more than likely be bigger. People are generally bigger today. Then you'd have to adjust the tracks that they're running on. The technology for making tracks has developed. Running shoes, nutrition, all this has to be taken into account if you're going to be doing these fancy matchups. And see, I wouldn't mind if they were just a bit of fun. But what they're doing today, they're actually trying to use them to assess who's great and who's not. So you got to watch out for that. I'm not going to get into my dislike for Adam Smith. And I'm not keen on the guy. But I'm not going to get into that, AJ shouldn't do no pay-per-views on Sky. Nah, that's going too far. Business is business. AJ will end up fighting where he ends up fighting. It is where it is. But Adam Smith, I've seen him talk about Tyson Fury like he wanted to sign Tyson Fury, like he was fighting on Sky. And you're thinking, well, hold on. BT would never do that for AJ, like have any representative on BT talking like that about AJ, and they never have. We're talking about this Katie Taylor-Serrano fight. I think Eddie sometimes forgets that he left Sky. You know what I mean? Maybe he expects a little too much. I think Eddie left Sky and he thought to himself, okay, let me shake hands with all the people I'm leaving behind at Sky. It's going to be sad. You've still got Premier League, but, you know, the glory days of the boxing, that's over. See ya. How wrong could he be if that's what he thought? Like, Sky are continuing with boxing and they're going hard. Signing Clarissa Shields, Savannah Marshall, and a host of other boxers, female boxers. Caroline Dubois, Lauren Price, and her fiancé. So this Eddie Hearn interview was talking about Sky not covering Taylor versus Serrano. You know, Taylor fought the whole of her career on Sky until the switch. And Eddie seems to be a bit miffed that they're not covering the fight. Biggest women's boxing fight, and they're not covering it. And he was talking about how sometimes they'd be covering BT events, Frank Warren events, with real enthusiasm. This was when Eddie was on Sky. And Eddie would say, there are rivals. And Adam Smith would say, well, look, we are a news outlet as well, so we're going to look for content outside of Matchroom shows. And Eddie said, okay, all right, no problem. And he's saying, well, if that's the case, how come you're not covering this? And I think Eddie just has to accept that they're rivals now. So I don't know how much coverage Eddie wanted them to do, because I went on their website when I started reading the story. And when I clicked onto boxing, Serrano and Taylor was the first story that came up, and they had a substantial write-up about the fight. What more do you want? They're not going to put it on Sky News and promote it and advertise it. Of course they're not going to do that. What, so you can get your subscription buys up at DAZN? They're not going to do that. Maybe Eddie was thinking they were going to fly a few people over there to cover it. And furthermore, won't Sky be covering Shakur Stevenson, Oscar Valdez? Ain't they going to prioritize that? I don't know what Eddie's expecting. Is Shakur Stevenson the real deal? Did the Jamel Herring victory flatter him a little? I'm not saying it did. I'm asking the question because I was very impressed with that performance. Jamel looked excellent against Carl Frampton, but Frampton, he was washed. I did pick Frampton to win, so Jamel did exceed my expectations. I think I picked Frampton. I think I did. Shakur literally won every second of every round against Jamel Herring and stopped him. On paper, he was fighting lesser opponents and he wasn't getting those stoppages, but he stepped up, super featherweight, and great job. His hand speed was blinding. He was precise. He was effortless. Hand speed, angles. Really enjoyed the performance. Oscar Valdez, I see him fight through, was it a broken jaw or what other injuries? He lost a tooth against Scott Quigg, who probably purposely missed the weight, and the fight went through anyway. And he was considerably heavier than Valdez, and Valdez came through with the victory. But for a couple of months, he was unable to eat solid food. He said the pain was at a 10, and they had to dose him up with morphine because the pain was that bad. So he came through adversity. His skills were on show against Burchell when he won the super featherweight title. Shocked everybody with a 10-round knockout. Then he struggled against the Brazilian Conceição. Controversial decision. Could consider him lucky to get out of that one with the belt. Just before the Conceição fight, he popped for an illegal PED. Bob Arum, however, had the foresight to take the fight to Arizona, the Pascal Yaqui Tribe Athletic Commission, where he got a pass and was able to fight. You have to think though, what if Conceição had got injured really bad? I mean, boxing in America would really be under the spotlight. So the naked eye tells me that Valdez has to go back to his Scott Quigg style. Not because he wants to, but does he have the speed, the hand speed or the foot speed, the ability to make angles like Shakur? Does he have that option not to come forward and try and turn it into a brawl? You know, it's one thing looking really quick and boxing like how he boxed against Burchell. One thing doing it against Burchell. Stevenson, another thing. So that's going to be interesting. A lot of people think Stevenson is going to run away with it. I think Valdez is a totally different proposition to Jamel Herring. I have a feeling he's going to want to turn it into a brawl. And if he can, you know, we're going to see if Stevenson can take a punch, what his stamina's like, if Valdez can get to his body. All of that is going to be interesting. I think this is a totally different fight to what Stevenson has had in his career. I'm going to pick Stevenson on points, but it might not be as impressive as the Jamel Herring win. Not totally writing on Valdez either.